Imagine the steady hum of a restaurant during its midday rush. The kind of place where familiarity resides, not in flashy interiors or extravagant meals, but in the everyday routine of serving plates, refilling drinks, and exchanging polite smiles. Among the staff that day was Elise, a name you may not know, but her story might just stay with you. She wasn't expecting anything remarkable as she moved between tables. For her, this was another shift, one of countless others, where she worked hard and hoped for a decent tip at the end. But then came the moment. A single table. A single check. And a single note that would leave her standing still, her breath catching in a way she didn't anticipate. The customer who left that note wasn't just anyone. It was Barron Trump, a name that carries weight for reasons far removed from this story. But that day, it wasn't the name that mattered. It was the message. Take a moment to consider, what kind of words could have such an impact? What would prompt someone like Elise, who'd likely seen thousands of checks in her time, to stop and feel something so profoundly personal? This isn't about fame or headlines. It's about the quiet power of a thoughtful act. What was written on that piece of paper? And why did it matter so much in that moment? Stay with me, because this story isn't just about a waitress or a note, it's about how even the simplest gestures can transform an ordinary day into something unforgettable. Elise had no reason to suspect that today would be any different from the countless others she had worked. Her focus was simply on getting through her shift, delivering plates with practiced ease, and keeping that professional composure that waitstaff know so well. She'd learned over time that the job demanded resilience, politeness in the face of impatience, a steady demeanor no matter how chaotic the environment. At one of her tables sat a young man who didn't demand attention. He wasn't loud or imposing, just quietly observant, engaging only when necessary. This wasn't the type of customer who left a lasting impression at first glance, and for Elise, there was no indication that anything about this interaction would stand out. As he finished his meal and neatly folded his napkin, he slid the check to the edge of the table. A small, unremarkable gesture she'd seen countless times before. By the time Elise approached to clear the table, the customer had already left, blending back into the world outside with no fanfare. But there it was, a folded note tucked under the receipt, accompanied by a tip that was generous but not ostentatious. It wasn't the amount of the tip that stopped Elise in her tracks. It was the note itself. As her eyes scanned the words written in a deliberate, careful hand, something about them hit differently. They weren't casual scribbles or the usual polite thank you, they carried weight, like the writer had chosen every word with intention. Now, think about this, what could a young man like Barron Trump have written to a waitress he barely interacted with? Was it an acknowledgement of her hard work? Something deeply personal? Or perhaps it was a message that reflected something about him, something not often seen in the public eye? For Elise, the words brought a swell of emotion that she couldn't contain. Her mind raced. Why these words? Why now? And who exactly was this young man who had taken the time to leave such a note? This isn't the kind of story where grand gestures make headlines. It's quieter, more personal, and yet deeply impactful. What came next was a moment of reflection for Elise, one that left her both grateful and overwhelmed. What did the note say? Why did it mean so much? And what does this say about the way we treat one another, even in fleeting moments? By now, you are probably wondering, what could those words possibly have been? What was written on that small piece of paper that made such a lasting impression on Elise in the middle of her workday? And why did those words feel so powerful, so deeply personal, that they moved her to tears? Stick around, because we're about to walk through those very moments and the meaning behind them, a meaning that reaches far beyond just one note on one check. As we unravel this story, let me ask you this, have you ever had an interaction, even the briefest one, that stayed with you long after it happened? A moment where someone acknowledged you in a way that felt unexpectedly meaningful? Think about that, because that's the essence of what this story is all about. Before we get further into the details, I want to take a moment to thank all of you who are here, listening to this story. Your time and support mean everything. And if this story resonates with you so far, Please let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I love hearing from viewers all around the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need a little reminder of the kindness that exists in the world. Now, let's get back to Elise and that moment. Imagine holding that piece of paper in your hand, seeing those words staring back at you, and realizing that this wasn't just a note, it was something far more meaningful. What would you do? How would you react? And what could those words tell us, not just about Barron Trump, but about the importance of truly seeing the people around us? Stay with me as we explore what happened next, because this is where the story becomes something unforgettable. Elise worked at a small diner tucked away from the main roads, the kind of place where regulars came for comfort food and a sense of familiarity. That afternoon, the energy in the room was as it always was, steady, with the occasional burst of activity as tables filled and emptied. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint sizzle from the kitchen, creating an atmosphere that felt routine but welcoming. Elise moved swiftly between tables, balancing plates and glasses with precision born from years of experience. Her interactions with customers were warm but efficient, each smile and polite exchange carefully crafted to maintain the flow of the day. Like many in her line of work, she carried a quiet pride in doing her job well, even if it went unnoticed by most. She didn't expect recognition. For her, it was simply about getting through the day and doing what needed to be done. That day, however, something felt just a little heavier. Maybe it was the lingering exhaustion from the double shift she'd worked earlier in the week, or perhaps it was the growing pile of bills waiting at home. Either way, Elise pushed forward, as she always did, greeting each table with the same energy and focus she gave to the first. At one table sat a young man who caught her attention, though not because of anything particularly striking about him. His demeanor was calm, his movements unhurried. He spoke softly, placing his order with the kind of politeness that was rare but appreciated. Elise didn't dwell on him long. There were too many other tasks to juggle. The room hummed with its usual rhythm. A couple at one table laughed over shared memories, while a young family tried to keep their kids entertained with crayons and coloring books. Elise glanced at the clock, calculating how many more tables she could turn before the end of her shift. For her, this was just another day in a never-ending cycle. But here's the question: how often do we go through our daily routines without thinking twice about the people we encounter? How many moments pass unnoticed when something as simple as a few kind words could completely shift the course of someone's day? Elise didn't know it yet, but the young man at that table was about to do just that. As she brought his check and cleared the empty plate, she barely gave it a second thought. To her, it was one of dozens of tables she had handled that afternoon. The note he left behind, though, would soon demand her full attention. What happened next wasn't grand or elaborate, but it was something that would linger in Elise's mind far longer than she could have anticipated. Have you ever been so caught up in routine that a single unexpected moment pulls you out of it completely? That's exactly what Elise was about to experience, and it started with just a few words on a piece of paper. Stay with me, because the story only gets deeper from here. As Elise moved between tables, collecting dishes and balancing her tray, a young customer walked through the door. He chose a seat near the corner, away from the busier sections of the diner. His presence wasn't loud or commanding, but it quietly caught the attention of a few staff members. While he seemed focused on his own space, there was something familiar about him that sparked curiosity. It wasn't long before someone whispered his name, and a ripple of recognition began to spread. It was Barron Trump, the youngest son of a former president. While some of the staff exchanged glances, Elise remained focused on her job. She approached his table with the same practiced smile and professionalism she offered every customer, asking if he needed anything and taking his order with ease. Barron spoke softly, politely thanking her when she handed him a menu and later when she returned with his meal. He didn't ask for special attention or display any airs of entitlement. In fact, his calm demeanor stood out in contrast to the way people might expect someone of his background to act. For Elise, he was simply another person to serve, and she moved on to the next table without lingering too long. Still, there was something about his quiet presence that lingered in the minds of a few staff members. While other customers might have leaned into the attention his name carried, Barron seemed to almost avoid it. He didn't draw attention to himself, and if anything, he acted as if he wanted to blend into the environment entirely. For Elise, the encounter didn't feel remarkable in the moment. She was used to people of all types coming through the diner, some kind, some demanding, and everything in between. As she cleared his table later, she noticed the check and the generous tip he left. It wasn't out of the ordinary for someone polite to tip well, so she thought nothing more of it at first. But then, just under the check, she spotted the folded note. Picking it up, she hesitated for a moment. What could he have possibly left behind for her? It wasn't until she opened it that the weight of the words hit her. And here's the question: how often do we truly see the people around us, even in passing moments? What did Barron Trump leave in that note that turned a routine shift into something Elise would never forget? The answer was in her hands, and the impact of it was about to unfold in ways she couldn't have imagined. Stay with me, because the details of this moment are something you won't want to miss. Elise approached the table with the same energy she brought to every customer. Barron handed her his order, his tone polite but reserved, making eye contact briefly before glancing back at his menu. There wasn't anything particularly striking about the interaction, just the routine exchange between a customer and a server. Elise noted his calm demeanor but didn't think much more of it. For her, it was just another task in a long day filled with them. She returned with his meal not long after, placing the plate gently in front of him and offering a brief "Here you go, enjoy." He nodded in thanks, his voice steady but soft, and she moved on to the next table. Throughout the rest of his visit, Barron remained quiet, seemingly content to stay unnoticed. He ate with little fanfare, occasionally looking around the room or scrolling on his phone, blending into the rhythm of the diner as though he were just another guest. When he finished his meal, Barron neatly stacked his utensils and slid the check to the edge of the table, along with a generous tip tucked just underneath. Elise noticed this as she cleared his table, mentally adding it to her tally for the day. But then, something else caught her eye. Underneath the check, slightly tucked away, was a folded piece of paper. For a moment, Elise hesitated, unsure if it was something meant for her or accidentally left behind. She glanced at the door, but Barron had already stepped outside, disappearing quietly into the world beyond the diner's walls. Intrigued, she carefully picked up the note, its weight feeling heavier than it should for something so small. The routine nature of her shift faded as her curiosity grew. This wasn't typical. Most customers simply left a tip and went on their way, yet here was something more, a handwritten message left intentionally. What could it say? Was it feedback about her service? A word of kindness? Or something entirely unexpected? These thoughts raced through her mind as she unfolded the note, the words inside stopping her in her tracks. At first, she read the lines slowly, her brain processing each word with careful deliberation. Then, as the meaning settled, her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't just the message itself, it was the thoughtfulness behind it. The note felt deeply personal, as though it had been written with Elise in mind, even though their interaction had been brief. It was as if Barron had seen something in her that others often overlooked. This wasn't about the tip, the service, or the meal itself. It was about something much more meaningful, a quiet acknowledgement of who she was, and perhaps a reminder that her efforts didn't go unnoticed. What exactly did those words say? Why did they hold so much power in that moment? And how could such a simple gesture leave such a profound impact on someone's day? As Elise picked up the check, her mind was already elsewhere, thinking about the next table to serve and how much longer she had until the end of her shift. At first glance, it appeared to be just another receipt tucked under a tip, something she had seen countless times before. But as she reached for it, she noticed a small folded piece of paper beneath the bills. Pausing for a moment, she carefully unfolded it, unsure of what to expect. Her eyes scanned the handwritten words, and almost immediately, she felt her breath hitch. What she had thought was just an ordinary note turned out to be something completely different. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the paper, reading the words over and over again to make sure she wasn't imagining them. It wasn't just a generic thank you or a casual comment, it was something deeply personal, written with care and intention. Elise's expression shifted. The weight of the words began to sink in, and a flood of emotions followed: gratitude, surprise, and an unexpected sense of being seen. Her eyes glistened with tears, though she quickly blinked them away, not wanting to draw attention from the customers around her. She pressed her lips together, trying to steady herself as the significance of the message grew clearer. What could someone like Barron Trump have written that would bring such a reaction from someone who had served countless tables, handled countless checks, and experienced every kind of customer interaction imaginable? It wasn't the amount of the tip, though it was generous, it was the thought behind the words, the way they seemed to reach beyond the surface. This note wasn't just a compliment or a simple thank you. It carried something more, a recognition of effort, a sense of understanding, and a message that felt deeply empathetic. Elise stood there for a moment, the note still in her hands, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite put into words. Have you ever received something so unexpected that it stopped you in your tracks, making you pause in the middle of your day and rethink everything that had seemed routine just moments before? That was the effect this note had on Elise. She couldn't have anticipated it, but now, she couldn't imagine going back to the moment before she read it. The words Barron left behind had done something remarkable. They had transformed an ordinary shift into something unforgettable. What exactly did the note say? And why did it mean so much to her? The answers lie just ahead, so stay with me as we uncover the message that left Elise holding back tears in the middle of the diner. Elise carefully unfolded the note, her heart racing slightly as she read the words handwritten in neat, deliberate strokes. The message was simple, yet it carried a depth that caught her off guard. Thank you for your kindness and the effort you put into your work. It's clear how much you care about what you do, and it doesn't go unnoticed. Keep your head up, you're making a difference in ways you might not even realize. For a moment, Elise just stood there, letting the words sink in. She read them again, her eyes lingering on each sentence as if to make sure she hadn't missed anything. The message was more than just polite, it felt personal. It spoke to her struggles in a way that no one else could have known, and that was what struck her most. To most, it might seem like a kind gesture and nothing more. But for Elise, who had been quietly working 2 jobs to support herself and her younger brother, this note felt like a lifeline. It came at a time when she often questioned if her efforts were worth it, if the long hours and tired evenings were truly making any impact. This wasn't just about recognition, it was about being seen. For someone who often felt invisible amidst the rush of her daily routine, these words served as a reminder that her work mattered, that her presence mattered. It was as if Barron had managed to put into words the encouragement she had desperately needed but hadn't dared to ask for. The note touched something deeper than just her role as a server. Elise had dreams beyond the diner, goals she had quietly nurtured despite the weight of her responsibilities. Those dreams often felt out of reach, but in that moment, reading those words, she felt something shift. The message didn't promise solutions or miracles, but it carried a quiet power, a reminder to keep going. Have you ever received something so perfectly timed that it felt as though the universe had orchestrated it just for you? That was how Elise felt reading Barron's words. In the middle of an ordinary shift, in the middle of her busy, complicated life, those sentences gave her something she hadn't realized she was missing: hope. And that's the beauty of small gestures, they can carry an impact far beyond what the giver might expect. What Barron left behind that day wasn't just a note. It was a spark, one that reignited Elise's sense of purpose and reminded her of her own strength. But why did Barron write it? What prompted him to leave such a thoughtful message for someone he had barely interacted with? Stay with me as we explore what might have inspired him to reach out in this way, and how that simple act of kindness carried a ripple effect far greater than either of them could have imagined. Elise stood still for a moment, holding the note in her hands as the noise of the diner buzzed around her. She didn't immediately know how to process what she was feeling. Gratitude, surprise, and an overwhelming sense of validation all seemed to hit her at once. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the thoughtfulness behind them, the recognition of her efforts when she often felt like she was moving through her days unnoticed. Needing a moment to steady herself, Elise stepped into the small break area at the back of the diner. She took a deep breath, the words of the note replaying in her mind. It wasn't often that she allowed herself to slow down, let alone to feel something so deeply in the middle of her shift. But this was different. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt seen, truly seen, not just as a server or someone juggling endless responsibilities, but as a person who mattered. For the rest of her shift, she carried the note with her, folded carefully in her pocket. Each time the exhaustion of the day threatened to creep in, she thought back to those words and found herself feeling lighter. Tasks that had felt draining just hours earlier now seemed more manageable. The note didn't erase the challenges of her life, but it gave her a sense of hope, a reminder that even the smallest moments of kindness could make a difference. It's easy to underestimate the impact of simple gestures, especially in a world where so much feels rushed and transactional. But that day, Elise was reminded of something important, the power of acknowledgement. It wasn't just about the note, it was about the reminder that her work, her effort, and her presence were meaningful, even if she didn't always hear it from those around her. This story speaks to a bigger truth about how we interact with others. How often do we take the time to recognize the people who play essential roles in our lives, even if only for a fleeting moment? Small acts of kindness, like Barron's thoughtful message, have a way of creating ripples far beyond the moment they occur. For Elise, it wasn't just a note on a piece of paper, it was a lifeline, a spark that reminded her to keep going. And maybe that's the lesson we can all take from this, that even the smallest, most intentional acts of kindness have the potential to brighten someone's day, or even change the way they see their own worth. So, what about you? When was the last time you took a moment to recognize someone's effort or to leave behind a kind word that might carry more weight than you realized? Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. What's a moment in your life when someone's kindness made a difference? Maybe it was an unexpected compliment, a small favor, or even a simple note, like the one in today's story. Share your experiences in the comments below. I read every one, and your stories might inspire someone else watching. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next one. There's something special about sharing moments that remind us of the good in the world, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. And remember, the smallest actions, like leaving a kind comment or sharing this video, can create ripples that go far beyond what we see.